Thank you, Winston. Let me see if I can maneuver this. What Winston said, I came here last night from Tokyo. What he didn't tell you guys is I was in such a big rush in the morning yesterday that I forgot to pack my pants and a bunch of other things. So they're still sitting in Tokyo. I was supposed to be wearing a sports pant today for this event, but thanks to Winston, he actually was gracious enough to lend his son's pant to me. So I'm actually in his son's pant. Thank you once again. It's a weird feeling, you know, first time ever in somebody else's pant and giving a speech. I haven't given a speech for a long time. They say it's bad enough to lose your shirt. I lost my pen. So, anyways, okay. Well, so when I got here, I felt so welcome. Everybody was asking me, the first question was, when was your last trip to Korea? I wish to say, you know, it was last month, but unfortunately it was 13 years ago, back in 2012. And when people ask me the question, you know, I was actually going back to the year of 2012. That was an interesting year because right before that year, 2011, Winston said our company, Rinrin, it was a social networking company. We were often, you know, like he said, we were called the Facebook of China. We had about 350 million users. We had a little bit of ties with Korea as well. Our largest shareholder, backer in the company is a gentleman named Masayoshi Songsang, so of SoftBank. So he was the chairman. He was kind enough to put in $400 million back in 2008, had a huge amount of trust in us, and backed us all the way. And in his heart, I think he always thinks himself as being a Korean. So that's our Korean tie. We went public in 2011, and I think 2012, when I came here, the world was a completely different one. President Obama was still ruling the country. I think it was not President Trump. And China was still growing strong. It was not like a rocket growth, but it was speedboat growth, right? It was growing at almost 10% of annual growth in terms of GDP. And there was no transformer. There's no attention is all you need paper that was published by the Google 7 scientists back in 2017, right? That still got 5 years to go. So I was traveling in Tokyo a couple of days ago until last night. And before that, I spent a brief, 2 days in mainland China. Before that, I was in Hong Kong. And before that, I was in the US. I spent quite a bit of time in the US. And everywhere I go, I think people are different, but I find one thing in common amongst all of the people, which is I got a sense that most people I talk to, they would rather live in 2012, 13 years ago, instead of today. Because back at that time, globalization was still the case. China was still growing very, very strong. There was no eye to take your job. There was no threat. Everybody feels safe, right? And the economy was booming, and the US was a very, very inclusive society at that time. So people wanted to go back to those days. But then there's no going back because, you can't unwind. But if you trust Albert Einstein, you can. But so far, we don't know how, right? So my my presentation, it's long, but it could be very, very short. It's basically one word, and I'm going to give you the magic word, which is AI. So I've been attending various different conferences over the past couple of quarters, but none of them has to do with investment. This is the first investment conference I'm attending. I'm attending all technology conferences. I was telling folks I was in Hong Kong attending a EDA conference about the semiconductor. I was in the US attending various different conferences. And I don't think we can go back to 13 years ago, but we can look to technology for hope that a lot of problems that we're facing today are going to be addressed, if not completely solved, to a very large extent in the next couple of years. We're not talking about 10 years or 20 years. We're talking about years. So very quickly about ourselves, we already covered most of it. We used to be, I'm introduced as the CEO of Oak Pacific Investment. It's actually an investment vehicle that we spun off out of Rinrin, the mothership, the parent company, which was known for social networking. So at the peak, we had about 350 million users. Unfortunately, Professor Bala said in China there's over competition. It is the case, and we're the victim of that over competition. Tencent QQ saw what we accomplished and decided to crush us. And they, I have to say, they succeeded. So we ended up, we started Rinrin, but eventually over the past decade, more than a decade, we actually assembled a portfolio of companies. We invested extensively in the US, in Japan, a lot in Israel, as well as in China. And we've invested across board into fintech companies. Here, Mr. Zhao, his company, BCC, we're proud to be one of their shareholders. We invested in a fintech company in the US called Social Finance, SoFi, which was one of the first fintech companies that went public during COVID-19. And we invested in rocket science companies. We invested in a rocket company in Israel. Unfortunately, that one didn't turn out to be SpaceX. We invested in semiconductor companies, one of which I'm going to dive a little bit deep into in a minute. That one is revolutionizing the entire chip industry as we speak. They, to put it simple, they don't use zeros and ones for the calculation. Today, computation is mostly digital. They're actually using analog for computing. The result is 0.1% of the energy, of the power consumption of GPUs from NVIDIA, and potentially 1,000 times faster than GPU. So that's going to be a revolution. Mr. Kim, Winston, the host of this conference, the co-host, before this conference, he actually conducted an interview with me and my chairman, and due to time limit, there's actually a number of questions that was left unanswered. So I said I intend to answer some of his questions using this forum, specifically 2 questions. The first question everybody was asking, and Professor Bala addressed it a little bit, is about the tension between the competition between China and the US, and especially in AI, because I'm a technology guy. Is there any gap? And if so, what is the gap between the US and China, right? So everybody here know this way better than I do, which is there's the so-called DeepSeek moment, right? So the DS moment that nowadays people are talking about. In January, when DeepSeek made the debut, they actually have been around for a long time, but this is really the first time they made the announcement and published all the figures. And when people saw the so-called training cost, if you will, associated with their releasing of their very, very powerful model, people are like, unbelievable, and $1 trillion of market cap, and especially from NVIDIA, was wiped out, right? So that was the first effect, and people have various different arguments saying this is not true. They have excluded a lot of costs that should have included in. Nevertheless, $1 trillion, that was the impact. And the lesser known thing is, when I was in the US, when this happened, in late March, early April, there's a Chinese company out of Wuhan, a city called Wuhan, of Hubei province. It's a company called Manus. They announced their limited sort of access to their world's first generic, general artificial intelligence agent model to the world. And, some of the folks I was seeing in the Silicon Valley, they're like, James, did you try it? It's from China. I said, no, never heard about it. They're like, wow, the entire Silicon Valley was using it, and it was only 12 hours old. And it's a model called Manus, and a lot of you guys may not have heard of it because it only started open up to the public last week. But it's supposedly the first general agent that can help you with things like if you're getting on a trip to Korea, it can actually do everything for you. You don't have to touch a button, and it basically does the whole thing. And the same thing goes with the McKinsey type of report. If you have a research report, you want to look into the call center market in Korea and understand if there's a startup opportunity to be done here, it can actually complete a research report that's probably not as good as McKinsey's, maybe 80% or 90%, but at 0.001% of McKinsey's price, right? It costs nothing, almost. And my classmate, Peter Fenton from Benchmark in the Silicon Valley, just made a trip to Beijing a couple of weeks ago and made an investment into that company, right? So the U.S. venture capital fund investing into a Chinese company, and he is actually taking them global. So basically moving them to Hong Kong and maybe Singapore first step, and then to the U.S. So AI, what is going on today is AI has been around for 40 years, 50 years, right? From a long, long time ago. It's not a new thing. The new thing that we all know is called the large language model, which was based on the 2017 attention is all you need paper from Google. But AI is no longer, what I'm arguing is the gap between the US and China is really closing because AI is no longer the game what it used to be. Because AI used to be about science. AI used to be about research. And people coming up with all these, weird languages, the convolutional neural networks, the artificial neural networks, the long short-term memories and stuff like that, that was science, that was research. But today, everything is open source, right? Llama is open source, the paper is open source, everything you can find is available in Nature and Science, all the papers. So what is China really good at? China is really good at evolutional changes, evolutional incremental changes, making things better and better, right? Look, if you look at BYD, Chairman Mr. Wang sat on our company's board for almost 15 years. And we know when we talk with him, he is the ultimate example of a great, great engineer in the world. He's probably one of the greatest, and we love him extremely, very, very much. He is a great engineer. What are the characteristics of great engineers? They keep working on a problem, making it better, optimization. It's all about optimization. And if you look at DeepSeek, the DeepSeek moment is inevitable, and it's got to happen in China because all the fundamental stuff, all the foundations of their work, almost all of it was already invented. People talk about mixture of experts. People talk about dynamic loss scaling. People talk about shrinking down from 32 float points to 16-bit floating points to 8. It was already available. And it's only about putting all these things together, optimization. And this is what the Chinese engineers are really good for, because we were actually good at growing rice. And growing rice is all about irrigation, is all about every day, day in, day out, toiling in the land. And that's exactly what's going on in the field of AI as well. So it's inevitable, and if a game is becoming one of such, China is really closing in on the gap with the US, right? So if you look at AI's diffusion in the business world, for example, right? I gave a few examples. Everybody in the manufacturing space, from sausage makers, it's actually the largest sausage maker in China, called Shuanghui Huotui Chang, to one of the largest Caterpillar competitors in China, Sanyi Zhonggong, to legal law firms, to China Mobile. Everybody was using AI, and I read an interesting piece of news that today 3,000 hospitals in China, and still growing, that number is, are using DeepSeek in their hospital management, patient diagnosis, the scan, what do you call it, X-ray analysis, and so on and so forth, everything basically. And that number is still growing. I don't think 3,000 hospitals in the US are using this. And if you look at the consumer side, we were actually in the consumer revolution when we were doing social networking. But if you look at these numbers are mind-boggling. And these numbers are actually from a few months ago, from I think February or March, right? Chinese firms are collectively delivering more than 1 billion tokens. And I think this number had just quadrupled over the past 3 months. These numbers are a little bit delayed. Delivered 9 to 11 trillion tokens on a daily basis. And these numbers have quadrupled over the past 4 months. So the conclusion is the AI gap is rapidly closing between the US and China. I ran into some investors that were saying, because of the US-China tension and because of the tariff, they're going to bet short on China, right? And my advice is, and there's a lot of investors in this audience, I think don't bet against China. Just like Warren Buffett said, never bet against the US. Don't bet against China. And the second question, Winston, I know I'm running out of time, so I'll really speed up. The question is AI a bubble? Because a lot of people are saying the valuations are completely out of touch with the reality, right? And my answer is, it's definitely a bubble. Because every time there's a technology revolution, there's a bubble, right? It came at the time of Apple's introduction, at the first IBM PC clone, at the time of the internet. I still remember when I was working in 1999 at a company called Netscape. It was the first browser in the world that brought the world connected to the internet. And one day I went to work and one of my colleagues told me, James, you've got a Chinese company going public on NASDAQ. And I said, how do you know it's a Chinese company? He said, the company is called China.com. And it's a Hong Kong company. The guy turned out to be, he just bought the domain name, has no business, no revenue, no earning, no nothing, almost no employee, and it's $1 billion company, right? Is it a bubble? If it is not, what it is, right? Mobile, cloud, and AI is bigger than all of them combined. If you look at today's market cap, valuation of all the companies combined, and compare that against all the past bubbles, it's way bigger. But on a relative scale, that puts things into perspective. Internet was much more of a bubble, right? Some interesting stats. Back in 1999, 25 years ago, more than 80% of internet companies had no revenue, and almost all of them are losing money. We're losing money at the time of IPO, right? 20% has zero revenue. Who needs revenue? We had clicks. But today, if you look at the numbers for AI, the AI numbers are actually very impressive. Take, for example, I'll just give one example. There's a lot of numbers here, but if you look at OpenAI, the forerunner of them all, their revenue went from a few $100 million 2 years ago to, I believe, $3 or $4 billion last year. And this year, their revenue is shooting up to $15 billion, maybe even $20 billion. They just hired a CFO, Sarah Fryer, who happened to be my classmate, and she used to be the CEO of, I believe, Square, and she went there to become their CFO and closed a round with Songsang recently, $300 billion valuation, right, and raised $40 billion. It's crazy. But it's backed, but these guys have revenue. These guys have not only revenue, but revenues that are quadrupling every year, and quadrupling not only at the scale of $2 million going to $10 million, but quadrupling from $4 billion to $15 billion. And that is a real game changer. So it's actually, not only is this AI thing not a bubble as we believe, but it's actually going to be way bigger than all of them combined.
So, Mr. Liu, I think this time is up right now. So
Yeah.
maybe just one more very, very strong comment from you, and then can we have some panel discussion?
Okay, all right. I'll try to finish. Yeah. So bubble. Enough bubble. I'll talk. The next 50 years. What's going to happen in the next 50 years, right? So this is Dario from Anthropic. He's basically saying 12 months from today, all of the developers, all of the code are going to be done, produced by AI. At our company, we're laying off 50% of the people. At Microsoft, they're laying off people every few months. At Meta, they used to hire 5,000 people out of college, fresh out of college every year. Last year, with 300 people. And now they're letting people go. And this is the Magnificent Seven. These are the number of people that they hire for AI. Now it's dropping, because AI is revolutionizing itself. 10 years from today, all of the white-collar workers are going to be gone. 1 billion jobs. And for Professor Bala, I actually had a chance to talk with the dean of a very prestigious business school and economic institute of one of the universities a couple of weeks ago. He told me, James, 5 years from today, all of my students are going to lose their job because they don't have a job to do. What do they do? Analysis? AI can do a way better job than that. And PPT, they can do a way better job. I even thought about, this is not AI PPT though. I did it myself for benefit of disclosure. 30 years from now, the problems we're talking about, inflations, deflations, shortage job. I was in Japan, and Japan suffers from a shortage of labor. All of them are going to be gone because of AI. I'll leave you with a very interesting essay. If you haven't read it, you should probably, it's worth your time. Maybe it's like a 30, 40-minute read. It's a paper authored by a think tank, which is led by a former OpenAI researcher. The paper's name is AI 2027. It actually pitches the US against China, and it's a fictitious one. The name of the companies in there are Open Brain instead of OpenAI or Deep Brain, and Deep Scent. So it's a combination of DeepSeek and Tencent, right? So it's very, very interesting. Talking about what's going to happen in the next 5, 10, 20 years reads a little bit ridiculous, but if you think about it, I think it's great food for thought. And maybe I'll just two more companies, and that I'll be done. Here, because most of you guys are investors, you will be interested in the next trillion-dollar company, right? Because nobody could think about NVIDIA as being a trillion-dollar company, but today they are, and a lot of other companies. Where's the next trillion-dollar company? It's too late to bet on the existing trillion-dollar companies, right? And I'll give you a few examples. Not all of them have the potential, but some of them do. One of them is a company called Anysphere, and their product is called Cursor. So I'll give you some stats. Their revenue went from 0 to 100 million within 12 months, and from 100 million to $200 million within 4 months. It basically replaces all human for coding. So our engineers, for example, one engineer, 5 AI agents to help them. So you don't need to have a 50 people company. You just need 5 or 10 at most. We have this company called, really interesting company called Tetramem. Their mentor is actually going to very likely receive Nobel Award this year. They're revolutionizing the way chips are built. Chips used to be using zeros and ones and transistors for computation. This company uses analog signals for computing. So power consumption, 0.1% of GPUs of the NVIDIAs. And Vox AI, this is the reason I'm in Japan. We are replacing millions of call center agents in Japan. And it's human voice. It's basically human, completely like human, with a brain to think like human. And this is not only going to happen in Japan, it's going to happen everywhere. And with that, I think the ending note is history is going to happen with or without us. It's time for some decisive bets. Thank you.
Okay. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's nice to be back in Seoul again. I want to make a correction, Winston. I'm not from India. My great-grandfather is from India. So I'm a third or fourth generation Indian, but in Malaysia. Now, I think, I'm very used to giving a lecture for 90 minutes or for the entire day. So to try to say something in 10, 15 minutes, this is actually much more challenging than actually giving a lecture for a whole day. But I've tried to put some of my, thoughts, onto a PPT to share with you, as you discuss about investment strategies. Because obviously, if anybody were to tell you they know what is going to happen, they are lying, right? Because I think we are living in a world where nobody knows what is going to happen, even tomorrow. But I think it is possible to know certain things that we are probably more sure of. There are certain things that probably we are uncertain about, right? And I will list them to you later and try to put my thoughts across to you. Now, but before I do that, I need to make sure that my salary this month comes in. So I need to talk about the school that I come from, China-Europe International Business School. The school basically is a joint venture between the Chinese government and the European Union. And I think this is a wonderful example of what can happen when governments actually cooperate with one another, right? The school is 30 years old. Last year we celebrated our 30th year anniversary. And we have our main campus in Shanghai, but in China we also have our campuses in Beijing and in Shenzhen. And then internationally, we are the only business school that is based in China that has campuses in Europe, in Zurich, in Switzerland, as well as in Accra, in Ghana, in Africa. So it is, in that sense, truly international. But I have to say that, like many Chinese companies, we are probably known in China, but not necessarily outside China, right? So you may have heard of BYD, you may have heard of TikTok. I'll give you one more name to remember, CEIBS. Because last year in the Financial Times ranking, the global EMBA program that I'm responsible for was actually ranked #1 in the world, right? Must be a CEIBS alumni that. So I think this is, in a sense, really the story of China, right? If you look at my school, CEIBS, 30 years ago, this was basically an effort by the European Union to help China to develop talents that are able to understand Western management concepts and so on, right? But today, after 30 years, we are actually leading the world as far as business education is concerned. Right? I think this is a great example of what China is capable of. All right. Now, I think, as was mentioned in the keynote speeches just now, I think you're all finance people. You know better than me that we are in this uncertain world. And I tell my students that today the only thing certain in life is there is going to be uncertainty, right? This is a way uncertainty has been measured, the World Uncertainty Index. You can find out how this is measured, but this is something that is accepted by many academics and researchers. You do find that in the last, let's say, 10 years or so, the extent, the intensity, and the regularity of these events that creates uncertainty has actually multiplied. I believe that historians in the future would probably talk about this particular period, right? If you want to call it de-globalization or slow globalization. I would say that probably the event that actually started this is probably Brexit, right, in 2016, right? Because here was a situation where a country actually wanted to leave a union, right? Because in the past, the trend was signing free trade agreements, bilateral agreements, and so on. But with Brexit, this was an event where a country actually wanted to leave a union, right? And then since Brexit, of course, we have had Trump 1.0. We have had the trade war of 2018 between China and the US. Then comes COVID-19. As COVID was settling down, we had trouble in Europe with Russia and Ukraine. And as that was becoming something of a normality, sad to say, you had problem in the Middle East with Gaza. Then comes Trump 2.0 and whatever has followed after Trump took office early this year, right? And I think we have to come to terms with the fact that this is not going to be the end of it, right? In the sense that, many other events, we are not even talking about things like climate disasters or other, I think as was mentioned in one of the speeches just now, right? 50 over conflicts, right? In just this last couple of years, right? So I do think that this is something that is going to happen, and you, as investment people, have to come to understand that this is going to happen over and over again. And I do think that for finance people, uncertainty is good news, right? Because I'm sure you can make money with uncertainty. Certainly for me, this is good news because with uncertainty, I am in more demand than ever before, right? Because everybody wants to know what's going to happen in the future, right? And all I can tell you is nobody knows what's going to happen in the future, right? Now, there is another one, another way that this has been measured by Financial Times, for example, looking at the sentiment of different articles that appears in Financial Times. So this is, in a sense, measures the mood, right, of the world economy. And you can also see a very similar graph in the sense that these uncertainties keeps on going up and down. And again, it becomes in such a way that it becomes unpredictable, right? Now, however, I'd like to share with you certain things that I think we know for sure, right? There are certain things that we don't know for sure, right? For example, we don't know who the next president of the US would be, right? Because definitely it's not going to be Donald Trump. That we know for sure, right? But whether it's going to be the current vice president, whether it's going to be from the Democratic Party, we don't know, right? Now, we don't even know whether Donald Trump's power is going to be as much as he has right now, because we know at the end of next year, there is going to be the midterm election. It is possible that the Senate and the lower house might change, in terms of power, right? And when that happens, of course, President Trump is going to have a little bit more difficulty to try to maneuver through the political system, right? So in that sense, we don't even know, in 2028, how much power that Mr. Trump is going to have. Now, we also don't know where are international relations heading to. When we talk about, for example, the US-EU relationship, right? As we talk right now, all right, you know that the negotiation between the US and the EU are actually at two different ends because nobody is willing to blink, right? So we don't know where this is heading to. We don't know about the US-China relationship. Yes, we have an agreement, but as with any other agreement, it can be discarded as easily as it has been signed, right? So whether the US-China relationship is going to become better, become worse, we don't know. One of the relationships that I am very fond of is the China-EU relationship, because this year it is the 50th anniversary of China-EU relationship. And of course, coming from a school that is China-Europe International Business School, of course, this is close to my heart. But I do think that if the relationship between China and the European Union, if this actually gets stronger, this is going to be fantastic for both parties, right? I think there is a lot that both regions and countries are able to offer. But again, we don't know where this is heading to, right? So similarly, for example, next one here, when we talk about developing countries, we also don't know whether other developing countries, where will they pivot to, right? I can tell you that in the last Trump's presidency, many countries, for example, where I come from, right, Southeast Asia, these countries were very sure. Their foreign ministers made statements that we will not choose sides. We will remain neutral, right? But if you look at some of the statements that has been made in the last couple of weeks, the same foreign ministers are saying we may not have a choice but to choose sides, right? So you can see how this is also changing. So in the sense that will countries like, Malaysia and Singapore and Thailand and Indonesia and so on, will they be more favorable to China? Will they be more favorable to the US? Again, this is an open question right now. Similarly, as was mentioned, I think, in one of the speeches just now, we also don't know where the US economy is heading to, right? There has been talk about a recession in the US with the recent bill that was passed, the big beautiful bill, as Trump calls it. This is going to add more money into the pockets of Americans. At the same time, this is going to limit the number of goods that is going to come into the US. Obviously, demand is going to be greater than supply. And I think we can easily predict that there is going to be inflation in the US, right? Now, if there is inflation, economists know only one way to solve inflation, and that is to increase interest rates. And we know when interest rate increases, the dollar is going to get stronger, and so on and so forth, right? But again, we don't know where this is heading to. We don't know how much is the independence of the Federal Reserve in the US, right? Now, so these are some of the things that I'm sure we know we don't know, right? Now, what are some of the things that we do know? Let me share with you. Number one, we know for sure that China will be continued to be ruled by the Chinese Communist Party. That is not going to change. Not in the next 10 years, in my opinion, definitely not in the next 25 years, right? So I think as foreign investors, we have to come to terms with this, right? The government in China is not going to change. Similarly, we cannot expect China to follow Western-style democracy. This was what was expected in the late 1990s when there was negotiation to admit China into the WTO. The president of the US at that time, Bill Clinton, has made a statement. The hope is that with opening up of trade, of investment, China will become more and more democratic, right? I'm using my words here. But I think after 25 years of being in the WTO, the Chinese Communist Party is more powerful than ever before. So in that sense, a single-party state is what China is going to be, at least for the next foreseeable future. That is not going to change. We also know that as a result of a single-party state, the system that you have in China, where you have state-owned enterprises playing a dominant role in the economy, that is not going to change either. Whether this is not part of the WTO, but this is part of the Chinese political and economic system. State-owned enterprises will continue to play a dominant role in the economy. We also know that the Chinese will continue to innovate, and Chinese companies will continue to be in the forefront of technology, right? I think some of the companies that we know of, as I mentioned just now, whether it is BYD or whether it is CATL making batteries, whether it is Douyin or TikTok or Xiaomi and so on, these are just some of the companies that we have heard about. There are hundreds of other companies that we have not heard, right? So I think in that sense, the more China is pushed to the corner, the more China is restricted in terms of what it can do and what it can't do, the greater the innovation from China is going to be, right? Because you know, when we are pushed to the corner, we are survivors, we will survive, right? So I think if we expect China's companies to pull back in terms of technology, that is not going to happen. We also know that the Chinese domestic market will continue to grow, especially the demand for services, right? Because even today, China's GDP, more than 50% of China's GDP is in services, not goods, but in services. And as the country develops, we know that the demand for services is the one that is going to increase, right? So I think we have to, I tell my students, there is only one country that can replace the US for Chinese goods and services. And that country is China itself, right? So I think in that sense, the domestic market is one of those that is going to do better, right? At the moment, for example, it is less than 40% of China's GDP, compared to in the US, for example, which is 70%. Now that 40%, I think it's a question of whether the cup is half full or half empty, right? I look at it as half empty. There is still so much potential in China that we have not seen yet, right? Now, so lastly, any foreign company that is interested to invest in China, I would say you have to think twice today, because you have to be prepared to compete with some of these great Chinese companies, because China, in my opinion, is actually over-competitive today, right? The environment is such that competition is so high that to make money is actually pretty difficult, right? So any multinational that is thinking of coming into China, you better be prepared, not just to compete with other multinationals, but also, more importantly, are you able to compete with local Chinese companies as well, right? Now, so to put it kind of bluntly, the globalization of production as we know it, which has been dominant in the last 25 years, is no longer sustainable. But what I think will be sustainable will be the globalization of markets, right? Markets would still be globalized, but when we talk about the kind of supply chain that we are used to in this last 20, 25 years, I think that is no longer sustainable. It will be there, but that may not be the dominant feature anymore, right? Now, so I would say that in your deliberation, one point that I would like you to think about is regionalization is a good alternative, right? Maybe the policies from the White House is making regionalization much more viable than ever before. But I have to say that even today, when we talk about Asia, right? If you look at trade, if you look at investment, we are actually more regionalized than globalized, right? Most of our trade, most of our investment is within the Asian region, right? More than 50% is within the Asian region, right? If you look at some of the numbers here, yes, the US, yes, the EU is important, but more important is Asia itself, right? Now, there are many reasons why Asia is important. This is from McKinsey in terms of their prediction, what would be Asia in 2040? And you can see from the numbers here that we cannot underestimate the power of Asia, right? And I do think that sometimes the question I have in my mind is, can the world live without the US? And that, I think, is something that we have to be thinking about, right? So with that short remarks, thank you very much. My concluding thoughts here would be, yes, there is a lot of talk about economic slowdown, for example, from Morgan Stanley. But at the same time, there are also people who believe, and I'm one of those, that Asia, China, I'm sure places like Korea, Southeast Asia, I think we have to accept that we have strong fundamentals, right? We have strong fundamentals. What we need is the domestic market to become even much bigger, right? And given the situation that is happening right now in China, I really do not have any doubt that this domestic market in China is what is going to be the key feature of China of tomorrow, right? So with that, thank you very much.
Two speakers, wonderful. I mean, appreciate Dr. Bala and James. And then let me actually ask a question to one of our panels, Mr. Chang Zhao. Mr. Chang Zhao, Chang is a founder of the great company called the BCCglobal, which is my company. And then he founded his company in 2008, and then with other partner named Mr. Ted Lin there. Ted's right there? Okay. Yeah. So it's been more than 17 years. And then the company BCC and Chang has been helping many Fortune 500 companies. I think that almost all private equities in China are BCC clients, right, Chang? So yesterday we had like interesting discussion talking about this topic is uncertainty about the U.S. and China tariff and everything like this. But my question is, Chang, you actually mentioned that the U.S. is maybe no longer a police officer of the world, right? And then with this uncertainty, well, I mean, James has talked about the BYD and the promising Chinese companies. I think that. What do you think about the future and this uncertainty, and then how countries like South Korea, heavily dependent on China, about 21% of trades is coming from the exports are coming from China. How this country can survive in this certain era, right? Obviously it's very uncertain. Chang, can you go ahead and?
This is a pretty heavy topic for about.
Yes. Chang, you are a U.S. citizen, right? So you can. This is kidding.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to the GIC forum. To answer that question, I like to reframe it because, as Dr. Bala said, we cannot predict the future, right? And we don't know what's going to happen. But I think there's a very high likelihood that there will be conflict in the foreseeable future. And I think it's with increasing likelihood that a conflict will no longer be limited to the current scope of trade and economic warfare, and very likely to escalate. Right, I mean, I think if you asked anyone in this room the same question in 2020 or 2019 or 2017, I think it's very likely that everyone would say this is crazy. Everything is still on a very good trajectory. The conflicts are temporary, unlikely to be fundamental in nature. I don't think that if we just take a survey of the people in this room, any of you still believe that anymore. So if we're just saying the quiet part out loud, then I think the preparation, I hope that this type of preparation has already begun. Because what we have seen in the last 7 years leading up to this point is not US abdicating from its responsibility as the world leader or the world police. It's fundamentally a struggle between two opposing and diametrically opposed philosophies of isolationism and globalism, and ultimately about individualism and collectivism. And the core of the question is really not just about prosperity, it's really about survival. Right? When we're talking about food supply, when we're talking about fertilizers, when we're talking about logistics network, international trade, electricity generation, it's not a question about if you can live without it. It's a question of whether you can survive without it. So ultimately, it becomes a security question. And unfortunately, the political nature of a large part of the world is not in a ultimately rational state, but dictated by populist sentiments once every 4 years, 5 years, or 8 years. And the expansion and contraction of these policy decisions ultimately is what creates cracks in global security order and the trust that underlines it. And the trust that erodes cannot be brought back, especially not in the same time frame. So, yeah, I'm sorry that we turned the morning session into a very serious discussion. But I think by the silence of the room, I think most of the room, right? And this is why I like Korea, by the way, right? As Dr. Bala actually mentioned to me when he was walking, and like, mostly older gentlemen in this room. That's correct, right? And most of you have served in the military. So most of you have seen what this is going. I don't think any of us like to think about it, but I think this is where we are.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chang. So Chang's comment made this topic very uncertain too, for the certainty. Appreciate it, Chang. I think this is a great moment. So we don't have much time right now, but my question to Mr. James Liu. James, I think that you made so many investments. Also, it's very, very interesting. You've known Mr. Masayoshi Son since early 2000. Am I correct? And then, so we have many audiences here, and then a lot of them investors or private equity investors. We have a person from like Shanghai, it's a Shaman, and then they're doing venture capital. What is your probably secret sauce for these audiences when you make an investment? What is a crucial point of probably when you decide to company, especially you're renowned for venture capital investments all over Asia and East Asia, right? So can you?
Yeah. So I'll correct you. There's no secret sauce. We're not. We aspire to be as successful as some of the folks like Sequoias and so on, right? But for us, we are foremost and first. We are entrepreneurs. We build companies. We build companies from scratch, and we enjoy it. So when it comes to investment, we follow a very similar philosophy. We invest, typically we focus on investing in very early stage startup companies. So companies even before they started the company, before they're in corporation, we bet on those guys. And when you do that, you know that they often pivot because the thing that they started with often enough doesn't work out, so that they have to change course over time, but probably many, many times. When you bet on companies like that, it's all about people. The most important thing is about people. The reason we invested in BCC, for example, it's all about people. I didn't meet Winston Kim at that time. Maybe you were not part of the company, but Chang and Tad, they were impressive enough. And I really love one description of entrepreneurs is you've got to be irrationally optimistic while hyper-realistic at the same time. Because you've got to be irrationally optimistic. Otherwise, how can you start a company? 99.99% of the companies die eventually. But at the same time, optimism is not the solution if you want to gain your next customer. You have to be realistic. You have to understand your competition and keep on improving your product. So it's a very rare combination. You almost have to be psychologically sick in order to fit that bill. But that's the kind of people that we are. That's the kind of people that we look for in our search.
Okay, so I apologize. We don't have much time right now. But next GIC is going to be not 2025, 2026, May 2026. So if you would like to be part of a more GIC, you can always sponsor this event, right? Okay, ladies and gentlemen. These three gentlemen came from Dr. Bala from Shanghai, James from Tokyo, Hong Kong, Chang from the US. Let's give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Mr. Bala, and then Chang and James.